911, what is your emergency?
Units respond code 3 to a 1050 on the highway. Vehicles are blocking multiple
We're en route
lanes
to the
of travel.
hospital. Patient is currently having
We've got a
cardiac
4-alarm
arrest and has
fire
been
here.
intubated.
Send additional
Protesters are
trucks.
outside of City Hall and they are not complying with our
Out
orders
on 1,
to
hold the
disperse.
air.
In a rapidly changing world for first responders where it seems that every day the rules and norms are changing, there is one voice you can count on to give you the latest in emergency news. That is Lifeline. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Lifeline 911 podcast with your host, Erica.
Hello.
I am your co-host, Gary, and today we are going to be discussing System of a Down, Crowdstrike. On July 18th, 2024, at 10:09 p.m. Central Time Zone, the cybersecurity company Crowdstrike released an update to its Falcon sensor security software, which caused the computers using it to brick and display a blue screen of death, shutting down systems around the world from airplane travel to emergency services. This also affected Austin, Texas. With computer-aided dispatch CAD systems dropping off, 911 operators and police dispatchers had to quickly adapt to losing one of the most valuable tools in their jobs. While each agency had to figure out on their own how to navigate through this, a universal principle involved in managing through this event was to stay calm and work the problem. Joining us this week is Tatiana Rivera, an emergency telecommunications supervisor with nearly 10 years of experience, 7 of which are in dispatching. Tatiana, thank you for joining us today.
Well, good afternoon, guys. How are you?
Good.
Great.
We're excited to have you on. And, yeah. I mean,
I'm excited to be here.
It's an event everybody kind of knows about. So, and I think a lot of people were affected in different ways. So I'm very curious to hear, how that went down.
By surprise, for sure. So it was, it was pretty early into our shift. So obviously, I worked the overnight shift, the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. shift, and the first hour or so was pretty much smooth sailing, normal operations. And then about 11:30-ish is when things started to go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just simple things. Like it was basic, errors on the computer screens, on our CAD system. But we couldn't quite pinpoint exactly what the error was. We didn't even know that the CrowdStrike was happening at the moment. So it was trying to, circumnavigate everything the best that we know how.
Mm-hmm.
So I know for me, because, for everybody that's listening, me, Gary, and Tatiana were all supervisors at the same agency. So I remember earlier in the afternoon, there was an update that was cycling on both my CAD screen and my admin, and I kept putting it off. You know how it'll tell you, you can set a time, or do you want to do it now, or put it off, or reschedule, whatever the thing says. And I did that for most of my shift, and probably, I remember now, might have been around 8:30, 9 o'clock when I finally said, oh, I'm so sick of this thing. Fine, let's do it. Because I was done with my stuff for the day. And I thought, okay, this is a good time and it'll be good to go and ready for night shift. I remember thinking that. I had no idea what was in store. And I didn't find out about it until the next day. I think I even came in early that morning and found out that basically all HE double hockey sticks had broken loose. So, yeah. And I was nice and tucked into my bed, snug as a bug in a rug, and I knew nothing. So I know you said about 11:30 is when it started, when things started to kind of go sideways. At what point, if you can remember, when you and whoever was working with you in the leadership looked around and went, okay, this is bigger than just a glitch?
It really was once we started getting more reports about issues with our CAD, which is probably about 10 minutes after we started getting. So to kind of circle back, at 11:30 was the first error of any type that we had even gotten. Was one of our call takers has stepped up to us and let us know that their admin computer had just crashed. So the same blue screen that you were trying to get the update for was starting to circle around on some of the computers. And so, we just went ahead and had them restart. Typical, let's just try and troubleshoot those problems as we know how. And then some CAD systems, some CAD stations started crashing as well. Same thing. Have one of the release pull the active radio that the dispatcher was on so that they could restart, get back onto online, right? But 11:40 was when everything kind of crashed. So it was MDCs started getting disconnected, which is those were the mobile computers that the officers use. On top of their city cell phones that they have, were forced logged out of everything that they have access to. And so at that point, we knew something else was wrong. So it was more so out of our control at that point, other than trying to do restarts and see what other issues. So then we started contacting comp support.
Yeah. And that's where the poor soul, you had to wake up at midnight by now, probably somewhere around midnight. And from there, so I guess, and I don't know if you have any question, Gary, you can just jump in, but I'm just, thinking in my head, I'm picturing everything happening. So you've got call takers, dispatchers, the floor is basically it's almost, I envision like a domino effect, just one right after the other. And you're like, what in the is going on? So when you had another partner at work with you, right? You had another supervisor on duty, or was it just you?
No. Our coworker Ashley was with me, and so when we started noticing some of the issues, we just kind of started discussing amongst ourselves how we were going to do things, and we tried to start doing what we normally do every month on night shift, which is our CAD down procedures to try and obviously allow the systems to update. But now we have this random crash that's happening, and so how best we implement that with all the chaos that's kind of ensuing on the floor.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What's always interesting to me, I guess, when you have sort of a major catastrophe is, anybody can sort of Monday morning quarterback it and like feel like, I've got, I would have done this and that. But as the event is happening and unfolding, how do you, in your own mind, kind of know when to escalate it to the next level? So like we'll have like floods or when we had, Winter Storm Uri come through, it kind of just escalated. And then it's like, okay, major catastrophe. I need to, we're operating way outside of standard operating procedures right now. So to me, what's interesting is how do you know, or how did it go for you? Like feeling like the event was getting like, okay, I'm having trouble with one computer to, oh, we're going to have to go to CAD down procedures to, oh, we're totally out of left field here. Everything's down. Like, how did that kind of progress?
To get to that point, especially when we started checking with surrounding agencies. So within our facility, we have multiple agencies. You have fire, EMS, county, TxDOT, and we were starting to check with those other divisions to see if they were running into the same issue, since they're all on the same CAD system as us. And they were starting to report the same issues. And so when we started to see, it was more of like almost a citywide thing and not just us as in Austin Police and our system. We had already contacted comm support like we would have to make sure that, on their own back, they can back into the system and see whatever they might find. And then when we started getting all the other reporting issues from the other agencies, that's when we notified the AMs, so our assistant managers, to figure out what steps they wanted to take necessarily, but also let them know what steps we were taking as far as trying to do the CAD down and any updates that we had currently had at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So what was kind of the sense like on the floor, like as that was kind of expanding, like how people felt at 10:30, 11:30, like how was that progressing?
Beginning of a shift, normal every day, operations, people coming in, sitting down, having their conversations, having a system that's working correctly at the moment. And so it was fine for a little while. Once we started getting some more of the errors popping up on the system, the call taking side wasn't so bad as far as having to deal with the issues, because they were so, like, our 911 lines were not affected. That was coming in perfectly fine. So they were still getting their calls and they were still getting everything else. But what was happening was, with the CAD system not operating correctly, they weren't able to verify location. They weren't able to actually just input the call into the computer aided dispatch. And so they were having to start going to paper, which is why we were starting to do the CAD down. Now on the dispatch side, that was a whole nother story because now I have, instead of one person complaining that their computer's frozen, I'm starting to get 10 different dispatchers trying to get on me to be like, hey, something's up, I can't operate. And so with having such a younger generation in our center as of right now, they were not accustomed to the ways that we used to have to do CAD down procedures back in the day, which was purely pen and paper and flying blind, meaning that you didn't have any visual of a call other than the piece of paper in front of you.
Yes, yes. And we were talking just before we started doing the show about Tatiana and I, for sure. And I know you were there also, Gary, but me being the older of the three, I remember even further back when we had a typed out card, with little blocks, and everything was in its own place. Your case numbers, and each officer was represented by I don't know, a 5x5 square of paper with everything that you need to know about that officer on it. And there was a system, and I can remember, this is probably now, probably 20 years ago at this point. God, I'm old. Ugh. Anyway.
Yeah, the smoke
Probably,
signals going up in the air to tell the officers where to go.
Yeah, pretty much. And I just remember not having all of the luxuries that we have now, like, the little car on your screen representing the officer, and you can literally watch it go around, and having the boundaries clearly outlined for you on the screen. And so everything's so automated, and I didn't always have that. And I find myself sometimes longing for those days. So in my head, I'm thinking, if I'm you, like Gary said about the Monday morning quarterback, I'm just thinking to myself, well, okay, we just go to paper. But I guess it's not that simple when you're in the moment, because I do remember what it was like to have that stuff. And
Well, and I
that's
think
not
sorry, I didn't mean to. I think
no,
that that's a
go.
good point to bring up, though, is the fact that, there was a simplicity with going pen and paper, and there was a way of adjustment that you had back then, right? Whereas compared to now, everybody's so tied into everything digitally and electronically. And most of the time it works. And it's amazing when it works because it makes efficiency and output, so much better in whatever line of work or even in personal life, right? But the moment it goes down, those who have never had to do anything manually is the best way to say it, then they don't know what they're doing. And they get frustrated, and then they start to lash out because they don't understand how to readjust.
Well said. That's beautifully said. It is absolutely true, because we will go around the floor. I have on more than one occasion, just for snigs and grigs, I will I'll ask someone, hey, do you know what a MapsGo is? Or do you know what it means to actually find that location in a map? And they look at me like I've got a second head, and they don't know what I'm talking about. So I can only imagine when this thing started to go sideways, I wonder how many thought, well, they'll fix it any second now. They're going to fix it. And then when it
And that
became
was
obvious that was not going to be the case.
That was something too, like the maps, right? So obviously our CAD system has maps that update and move around with officers assigned to calls. But when we had to go try and find our paper copies of every sector to help with the assignment of calls, the maps that we currently had on hand were out of date. And so thankfully my admin computer had not gone down yet. So I was able to slowly start getting in and printing out some map copies that were more updated. But eventually my computer went down too, and then I couldn't do anything.
Oh, wow. So how much I guess, were you able to get enough for each station? Well, surely not, because when you think about however many dispatchers and call takers you had on duty at the time, probably talking about what, 20? At least 20 stations?
We were able
between the
to.
two sides?
We were able to. What we did was that, like, I printed out as many as I could before my station dropped off. And then if somebody else's station
Okay.
hadn't been kicked out yet, I just went into their station and I was like, I need to get these printed. and we were doing that as best as we could. And so we were able to get every copy to the floor. So it was nice because, dispatch only needs their actual sector. They only need the one piece of paper. So that's 10, maybe 20 or 30, because if you're talking about the reliefs having a copy of each sector, and then just the call takers were the ones that needed it a little bit longer. But thankfully, since then, the new updates have been put back on SharePoint. And so they're easily adjusted. But again, if we go down again, we're not going to have access to that SharePoint.
So it sounds like we need to start maybe looking at getting those things printed out and maybe laminated so that they don't, they don't go crinkly and wrinkly and brown over time, because hopefully it might be another 10, 15 years before something like this happens again, but then it could also be next week.
Yeah. And thankfully I saved all those, but yeah, we definitely need to make sure we could have a more solid process.
And hopefully they wouldn't have time to go crinkly, wrinkly, and brown, because I think what that kind of highlights one of the issues that is tough is because you've got to constantly be updating your backup and your system down procedures. So like the boundaries of the city change all the time. We just had a couple of areas that voted to de-annex from the city, and we need to make sure that our paper physical copy maps are reflecting that.
No, yeah, totally. And I think that because of having to have a manual way of doing everything, we got so accustomed when we updated from our last CAD software to this current CAD, and how we switched down our CAD procedures, that no one's had to go down to pen and paper in almost, I want to say, almost 10 years.
What? Has it been that long?
So we were still using TriTech when I started. TriTech was our previous CAD dispatch system that we had. That was in 2014 when I started. In 2016 was when comm support and the IT guys decided to implement the new system, which we currently have now for our CAD support, or our CAD down, which means that
Central Square.
We're on Central Square. But previously for CAD down is, yes, we had an operating system, but when we had to go out of it for updates, we went down a pen and paper. So you had a piece of paper that had your call, you had sticky notes that had your officers on it, and then you would just update notes on that piece of paper and move your officers around to adjust, right? But then eventually, when we started to upgrade the systems, we went to a fully digital manner, meaning that coming out of our primary, meaning our current production CAD, and logging into our secondary, or what we usually use as our training CAD. And so when we started implementing that process, all the pen and paper went out entirely.
That's true. Wow. Okay.
And that was in 20.
So I want to.
Yeah.
So, okay, circling back to the mentality, if you will, or the atmosphere on the floor. So you've got you and Ashley, you've got your leads, and that's your leadership team until the cavalry arrives, which is the assistant managers and comm support. So I guess the mindset, mentality, attitude, all of that of the floor, did it at any point click? Like I think we like to believe happens in emergency situations, because that's where we live and that's what we do every day, all day. Did at some point the floor collectively, or did you have some leaders pop up on the floor, say, okay, guys, this is what's happening, we have to adapt? Or did it stay chaotic and then you guys had to manage that mental or emotional aspect of the floor?
It didn't necessarily stay chaotic, but what I will say is that there still were miscommunications, which caused issues on the floor. I will say I'm proud of our staff in the sense that when they noticed things were going wrong and they saw people starting to run around and we told them to go into CAD down, they were ready to switch. I think that that's a strong point of what our night shift does, though, because CAD down usually occurs on nights. So they're
the masters at it. Absolutely.
They're easily able to switch out and start and change their mentality to go into that thought processing, right?
Nice.
But in saying that, even though everybody knew we were going into CAD down procedures, and then eventually we couldn't even try secondary. Our backup CAD system. We were doing pen and paper for a little bit. We did have some few staff members, especially some of the newer ones, that stepped up. So like I had a call taker who went ahead and logged himself out, and he started running calls back and forth that were written on paper. He was trying to help out with sectors, making sure that we were clear on what was happening and any miscommunication that was happening there. And dispatch was really well, even with some of the new trainees. They moved over to the pen and paper very well. When we tried logging into our secondary, though, what ended up happening was that some people were miscommunicated to. And so they were told, oh, yeah, I can go back into CAD. So we had some in primary and some in secondary. And so the messages and the calls weren't getting across because now you're in two different versions of the program.
Wow.
And so that caused a bit of an issue. And we didn't even notice that until way in at the end of the night when we're trying to collect certain information and figure out what was happening. But I mean, majority of the time, though, it was just call takers writing their call out, handing it to our runner, that runner trying to take it to the station, and then dispatch working at pen and paper, because dispatch really couldn't even log into CAD because officers had no access to anything too. So
wow. So it was literally blind, which,
Yep.
They had nothing.
Well, and they didn't even have like their record systems, right? So our teletype went down as well. And that was something that we were having issues with. Yeah, OpenFox, which is the program that they use to check for warrants and send communications to other agencies, was reporting issues as well. DPS reported issues. Houston reported issues to us. And then even with that, though, too, we even had another scare because Travis County's jail that we have downtown was reporting issues of their cameras and their phone systems being down. And so this was more than just... Yeah. So when I say that, like, we had the chaos in the sense of really not having anything, none of the agencies around us that we work with on the daily had any access to anything for almost the entire night. We didn't even start to get back into our main systems until about 3:30, 3:45-ish in the morning.
So a good 4 hours and some change of just utter chaos and adapting moment to moment, which I think is a testament to our profession for sure. Not that others can't, but we're literally we are in step up and get ready and react and respond mode all the time. But I think it goes to next level when something like this happens.
Yep. Yeah, wholeheartedly. Wow. It was quite a mess. And it's the harder part was kind of seeing when the rest of the cavalry, as you say, it came in, right? Our assistant managers and comm support, when they got on scene, on site, it was kind of a little bit disheartening, not because of them, but because there wasn't much that they could do.
Right.
We had finally started getting some word that it was Crowdstrike, but it took half of this entire process before we even figured out what it was. And so then, what's comm support? What's our CAD team going to even do? They can't do anything because it's not really our systems.
No, it's something much, much bigger.
Mm-hmm.
What so turned out to be basically a worldwide situation, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was a global situation.
Oh my God, that just blows my mind.
And
Gary, this is where you and your technical steps up.
Well, and that's something too, like you say global, right? And it's interesting when you think about companies and how far their reach is, because CrowdStrike is an Austin-based company.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so when, like, I've always, like, when I used to train people at dispatch, I would always say that the hardest part of the job is going to be that first 30 seconds when an officer keys up and says, I'm in pursuit, or shots fired, or just something. And like, you've got to put them on a call and get all those ducks in a row in a really fast manner. And then it'll kind of ease out. So too, I think it is with events like this, because we had an event on evening shift where the shift Erica and I are on, where like a breaker had gone bad and like 10 computers stations had just immediately dropped. So it's always that first, little bit where it's like this absolute cloud of chaos hits you, and you've got to figure out how to reorganize that into a workable manner to get through the event until you can get back to normal operating procedures. So kind of how long did it feel for you to to get through that initial cloud of just utter chaos to a place where it's like, okay, things aren't great, but we're sailing along here?
Thankfully, I had Ashley with me. Ashley and I have had our fair share this last year of getting some random chaos issues. And so the last one that her and I had was our 911 lines not operating correctly. And so we were having to figure out if we were going to set up our ILA procedure to send them over to San Antonio. And that had happened maybe like 2 months prior to this. So thankfully, Ashley and I have gotten to a point to where our communication, when things like this go down, they're pretty good. It was just a matter of taking the time to figure out how we were going to do things and if even doing a CAD down setup was going to work for us at the time. And so I think that probably took us no more than, I want to say 20, maybe max 30 minutes.
Nice.
So.
Yeah. Especially since you don't really know the scope of what's happening. Kind of like Erica, you were saying, like, it's not, is it a problem with our system or is it a problem with something else? And like, it wouldn't have helped to try and send any calls to San Antonio because, everybody in the world was experiencing, the same issue.
The same thing. Yeah.
And it was just one of those things, right? Like we talked about trying to troubleshoot. So, if something goes down with our teletype or with our returns, we always make sure, okay, is it just a program issue? Like, is it just a disconnect on CAD? Is DPS having issues with returns? Or is it an actual like TCIC or TLETs and NLETs thing that's a bigger problem, right? So we usually try and troubleshoot that all first before we even take it to our comm support and see if it's an actual IT issue on our side. And so we were just going through those normal processes first to see exactly, or obviously we couldn't gauge exactly how far this went, but to gain some sort of an idea of how big of a problem we were starting to walk ourselves into, or more like slam into a wall, but hey.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well said. And actually, I think it's right about this time next month, Tatiana and Ashley and I will make up the evening shift, and I fully intend to go to school with the two of you on stuff like this, because it doesn't happen typically on evening shift, but it can.
And that's, I wish, like, having learned I was part of the initial team when we switched out the CAD processes back in 2016. So seeing the way that we've grown and the way that we've adapted to things has been so great, but it is a detriment when you have other shifts that never get a chance to really do it, because the problem is that in situations like this, when things just crash, how do you adjust everybody's mentality when they're not used to doing it? And so
Absolutely.
It's one of those things where, as much as CAD team may not like it or whatever, but maybe that might be something that we need to adjust across departments all the way, between fire, EMS, and county, because other shifts need to be aware of how to work the process. And when they're not there, they don't know.
And maybe it's something that we suggest, even that maybe we ought to have a day of CAD down done on evenings versus night shift. And I know, people may not like to hear that because there's so much more activity in the daylight hours, and most every system that you can think of attempts, most of them do their maintenance, if you will, in the middle of the night when there's less activity and less traffic. But it leaves, in our case, say evenings and day shift, at a severe disadvantage because we don't have the muscle memory that night shift has. That's why literally I'm going on record, when you and Ashley get to the shift, I'm going to school, because seriously, this stuff can happen. What if it had happened at 3:00 in the afternoon on a global level?
And that's the thing, right? So outside of the Crowdstrike, there was one time I remember when I was just a dispatcher, I was working our downtown area command location, so George for us. And within 30 minutes of coming into shift, CAD crashed entirely. And I have hot calls coming in. I didn't have a roster to figure out who my officers were. I was flying blind literally for about an hour. But had I not learned those processes, I wouldn't have been able to manage that. Now, on the other side of things, recently, we were implementing every month to try and go to our backup center to make sure that the systems over there are running correctly. But with our switch to our new 911 system, we had call takers at one spot and dispatchers at another. So then how do you work CAD down procedures then when you physically can't get a piece of paper to them?
Oh,
Yeah.
So there's other issues that go
Okay.
just outside of the fact that our whatever program or any other electronic thing that we have going on goes down. You have other issues that might affect it. Because say, for example, there's, a tornado or something coming through, or we're starting to have issues and we have to move our communication center to our backup, right? Well, in that sense, we're only moving people little by little and not a full team all at once.
Yeah,
And so
because you
having that
can't just shut down one location. Yeah, you can't just shut down one location. It can't really like bug out. It makes me think about MASH. If anybody, God, I'm dating myself. But seriously, yeah, well, because they called it bug out, where you just literally, when they holler that word, everybody knows you pack up everything and you've got minutes to get it done. And in our environment, trying to take our primary location down and bring the backup center up, how do you do that? And do we have processes in place for that? So if CrowdStrike, in my head, made me think about anything, it made me think about what processes do we have in place, and more importantly, what ones don't we have, and what do we need to start thinking about? Because I think it's human nature to go, okay, we got through that. Thank God we got through it. We'll never have to deal with that again. Though we know that's not necessarily true, we act like it's true. And so we don't think, how do we get prepared for the next CrowdStrike type event?
And I think that's just something in general, like humanity in general, right? Is that we get so used to being in our bubble and how things look through our lens or how things operate in our little bubble that we don't seem to think about the exterior factors that might affect it, or even the smaller pieces that get overlooked all the time.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because then, like, yeah, you're right. Like, how do you navigate around those?
And how do we get prepared for it? Because we all have, especially a large center like ours. Obviously, there are bigger ones out there, and I'd love to find somebody in like New York and be like, "What did y'all do?" Because from what I know, I think their center like 3 or 4 different locations, and each one is 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 stories high, and like 800 people at each one. I know I'm exaggerating, but that's just my head. You think about New York and you just think mass, on the massive level. I would love to know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how. Like I said, I think that it happening on night shift was in a way a blessing because
Sure.
we had a team that was comfortable enough with switching out and going to other procedures. Um, but it did take some time before people stopped asking questions necessarily because I didn't have answers, right? Like it was funny
Yeah.
at one point because at the very beginning while we're trying to switch out to the CAD down procedures, so Ashley was helping run that portion and physically get the floor switched over. I'm on the phone with CAD team and our AM on my cell phone running across to other agencies, making sure that they're okay, that what's going on with them.
Yeah.
So our floor was kind of almost seeing me with like a chicken with its head cut off, trying to figure something out. Um, and it was pretty funny. So, trying to get that trying to find the light in things too. I think I think the
Yeah.
officers enjoyed it because they really couldn't do too much without us being able to guide them, which I think is also a reminder of how much they rely on us and what we
Yeah.
provide.
So when it kind of first started to roll out like that, did you and your counterpart who were on duty at the time, was it kind of just I'm immediately jumping into action, or was it like, let's take a few seconds to figure out what each of us are going to do, or was it like we've done these procedures so many times we already know what to do? Like, was there any planning, I guess, on your part when you first realized how big the problem was?
I don't think that we necessarily like purposely sat down and planned it out, if that's the best way to say it. Um, because I was already dealing with the notifications to our CAD team. I think it was just automatic. It was just a given of who was taking what role. And so I took the role of writing down all the updates and contacting the other agencies and figuring out what's up, while she handled the maintenance of the floor and the switch outs of that way.
Because I for myself, I find that it's usually the most difficult part is getting that communication, like keeping that communication going, because you're trying to deal with, questions on the floor. You're trying to deal with other agencies. You're trying to deal with, your support team, and making sure that everyone, like, your counterparts and the other leads or like supervisors are aware, like, this is where we're at. This is what I've done. So everybody's kind of on the same page. That part is always a real challenge to coordinate in the midst of a, an event like that.
Yeah, it definitely was just something, I think, that a mix of us just jumping into action, but having already seen what our roles were prior to figuring out that there was chaos ensuing. It just made it an easy transition into her managing our leads and making sure that the floor switched out the way that they needed to, and then me getting all the information we possibly could to figure things out. But really, within, like, I want to say about an hour of it going down, our one of our AMs and one of our CAD team members were already on site, and so that had kind of helped. Like, obviously there was a bunch that they could do, but them physically being there, I think, relieved the floor quite a bit, because they saw more hands on deck to try and adjust or correct whatever was happening.
I can see that easily, because it's so important to the front line to see their leadership in moments of utter chaos and uncertainty, and we don't know what this is, and we don't know how bad it's going to get, to look up and see them just there, even if they can't do a whole lot. Just being there is enough. It means a lot to them. That's just leadership 101. I like it.
Yeah,
well said.
It definitely was.
And so after the event was done and you were relieved of duty, how did you kind of de-stress after that? Did you, like, go for a drive? Did you immediately go to bed? Like, what was sort of your conclusion to that immediate kind of, that highly stressful situation you had just gone through?
I mean, handing it over was one thing. We weren't officially out of the woods when I was done at 6 a.m. in the morning. We were still having system issues, but we were in a better process of operating. So when day shift came in, they were able to just kind of ease into things and just deal with it as it was going, and not with the initial drop of everything. But for me, once I finally left, I have a good 30 to 35-minute drive home. So, I had that nice little drive to just kind of relax and let things settle out. And then I typically will come home and go, take a shower and go straight to bed. So I crashed when I got back here.
I bet. Just literally, you needed that decompression, and that drive home is a beautiful thing. Yeah, you don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to explain anything. You're just like, you know what, alone with my thoughts, and the drive. Because you said like 30 minutes. So, that's beautiful.
Yeah, the drive sometimes sucks when there's traffic, but leaving at 6 a.m. in the morning when there's no traffic on the highway, and I can just roll with the windows down and, either with or without music, and just cruise home, it works out for me quite often.
Especially after a night like that.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It was an interesting night, but I think that overall it opened up our eyes to a lot of small little things and how we can try and better update some processes.
Yeah.
I know we're all thankful to have people like you, Tatiana, to that are working on the night shift, working hard to keep systems operating and policies, procedures in place, and everybody safe, even when everybody's asleep. So thank you for your hard work, and thank everyone who went through that for getting through such a challenging event.
I will also say, as weird as it sounds, I will say thank you to Crowdstrike for that happening, because I don't think it would ever have highlighted any flaws that we have in our current systems to be able to figure things out.
And I'm sure whoever at Crowdstrike is like, thanks, but no thanks. I'd really rather not have that particular thanks. Hopefully that never happens again. I'm sure they would much rather not be responsible for us finding the kinks in our armor under the circumstances, because I'm sure they're still recovering from that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Can you imagine what happened to the programmer that like put that patch out? Like he's like
I don't
he's
even want to.
probably not with us anymore, if you know what I mean.
Well, and it's like at this point,
Yikes!
you're getting more than just there was a failure in a patch, right? It adjusted the systems globally. Airlines are computer-aided dispatches for 911, amongst other things. And so it's like now you're having to, first of all, any flaws got highlighted on any of those systems, but then now they're trying to come back. They're going to have to come back and be like, okay, well, you got to help us figure out all these losses that we had just gained because of a failure on your part. And so that's a heavy burden to take.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it just would seem like that would never be on one person. I think it's human nature to blame, right?
Mhm.
That's just human nature. When things go wrong, you point a finger because that's just what we do. But I cannot imagine something that big coming down to one person. There has to have been mistakes made, or maybe there a double check or another double check, a check and a balance, or somebody didn't check and somebody didn't balance. I can't imagine that just boiling down to one person. But that's just my personality. I'm always looking for the silver lining, if you will. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm asking too much, but I'd like to think that poor soul is not just the one poor soul. There should be 50 poor souls taking responsibility for that.
Well, yeah,
There.
and you would hope, right? Like an agency like that is here based obviously in the capital city of Texas, but that does affect globally. Are they going to take the hit as a team, or are they going to, unfortunately,
Throw one guy under the bus?
The person that pushed out by directive something that then affected everyone.
Well, everyone, we've been talking with Tatiana Rivera, who's a supervisor with communications and police dispatching, about the Crowdstrike issue, which caused quite a number of systems to shut down in mid-July of 2024. Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Yeah, it was wonderful.
And from everyone here at Lifeline 911 Podcast, I'm Gary.
I'm Erica.
And we will see you next week.
Thank you for watching our production of Lifeline 911 Podcast. If you have any questions about the topics we discussed today, or if there's something specific you'd like us to cover in a future episode, send us your questions at lifeline911podcast@gmail.com. Stay safe out there. Until next time, this is Lifeline 911 signing off.